Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce podcast. We get this question all the time for every conversation with our clients. How about returns? How do I get the parcel returned? How to deal with the consumer returns, etc., etc. We're going to cover this step by step, why it actually is so complex, get you a better understanding of the nuance that is in place there, but also how you can actually prepare yourself and the messaging towards your consumers. Welcome to a new episode. Hope you enjoy. I think 99% of the conversation we have with clients when they just start to contact us is probably about how about returns? And the answer is always we don't deal with returns. Obviously, the answer is much more nuanced. So we want to really go into details with this episode and happy to have you on this podcast again with us because it is a very important topic for a brand, I would say. A return, why is it actually so difficult? Can you help understand a little bit better?
Yeah, so my answer to clients or anyone who asks is not only that e-com doesn't support returns as they expect at least, but you probably shouldn't just simply accept returns in a simple way that you imagine. And you actually want to think very thoughtfully about probably not actually really accepting returns in a traditional way. So what I mean by traditional way is that if you're coming from a physical retailers, they offer returns and that is very standard. Physical retail is very different though, because if you buy, let's say, an electronic product, and a lot of times like the actual return policy is that it has to be unopened and unused, and obviously unopened and unused. And then you bring it back and the return counter is going to be able to see, okay, this is unopened. The seal is still on it. Or even maybe it's opened, right? They can still open it and see, okay, like the product itself is still perfect, right? So that makes sense, right? However, when you're talking about D2C e-commerce, and I really think whether it is shipping from China or even if you're shipping locally as well, you should really seriously reconsider if you want to accept returns in that simple way. That again, only really made full sense when you had physical retail. And a big part of the reason actually is the cost of returns. I believe Actually, I know because I was actually consulting in the retail industry before that even with physical retail, a lot of the times returns are actually not profitable, like on a unit basis for the company to process. And when you add D2C on top of it, so shipping costs, having a third party check things, the cost even becomes even worse. And literally, I think for the majority of brands out there, offering returns in the very simple way is actually going to be negative to your margins.
If you consider your example with the retail shop, that person in that shop knows the product, what they're selling. They can verify this is the real one, this is the right one, there's nothing broken. When it comes to consumer returns, because we talk about consumer returns, basically parcel has been delivered, the consumer has received it, and they want to return it. So the delivery is done. There is not, that's the consumer returns they're talking about. So the delivery is done. It's being then returned to a warehouse. And in the warehouse, there's a variety of goods arriving. And somebody has to say, like, this can still be sold. And I think this is the difficulty that you forget. The return process is not so difficult. Basically, somebody says, I don't want it anymore. You send them a return label. They stick the return label on it. Somebody comes to pick it up, or you bring it to a post office or whatever it is. And then the difficulty starts. That return location will normally consolidate these parcels and then have weekly batches being shipped to one location. And that one location then technically will open up all these parcels, will scan them and open them up. When they open them up, they need to know what to do with it. You have several options. One, do nothing with it, just leave it there. Two is you can destroy it because there's maybe no use to it anymore. The other option requires you to do a physical check, which is a quality check, especially with clothing. Is there a coffee stain, lipstick? Has it been worn? Is it if it's electronic? If I plug it in, does it still work? Is there something with the product that make it not being able to sell anymore? And then you have to decide, I need to put it back on shelf. And then when you put it back on shelf, the difficulty is, let's say you have warehouses on different locations in the world. Let's say you have a warehouse in China and you have a return warehouse in the US. How does the warehouse in China know what you still have left in stock that can be sold again? And let's say you will get exactly one order for that particular product, Yeah, that's the easy choice. But there are other options where some people buy two products. Then it might be more efficient to ship these two products where one is maybe in the US and the other two are definitely in the stock in China, ship them still combinedly as two in one order from China, because it makes more sense than to do that one item first from the US and then the other one from China. So the complexity then of handling your stock levels, your inventory levels when having return solutions is very, very challenging to manage. So you mentioned the cost aspect, but also the data aspect. How do you keep oversight on what's where? And who's going to tell you what to do with it when something is on shelf for a long time, or what not even selling out if it's a really fashion related product?
Yep. And on the cost part is that if you're using some kind of third party fulfillment or return center, they're going to charge you to process every one of those returns on a per unit basis. I mean, it's at least dollars, right? Up to like $10. I mean, it really depends on the product and what you need to do with it, right? And a very common question I get is, wait, but then like, why are they like charging so much per return processed? Now, from a operational strategy perspective, you think about the difference between that process that you just mentioned versus a customer service return counter at your local retailer, right? It's about capacity utilization as well. That customer service return agent at a physical retailer, they're getting paid some dollars or some euros per hour. Now, they're not always 100% busy. I mean, sometimes you might see a little line in returns, but to that retailer, every single return they process, at least of that labor, they're not actually like paying more. They're just paying that salary. So like it just makes sense for them to process the returns as efficiently as possible. And it goes back into stock. And once it goes back in stock, it uses the same restocking process. So for a physical retailer, the actual incremental cost of processing each return is actually not that significant. But if you're using a fulfillment center, like anywhere in the world, like that's an additional thing that they actually have to do, that they're not like packing packages, right? So that's why it actually usually has to be charged. Actually, it's always charged, and it's actually usually quite expensive for what it is. And then you compare it to, okay, well, let's say you live in the US as an e-commerce brand, and then, okay, I can process my own returns, right? I mean, I guess you could do that, right? Are you really going to, does that really make sense of your time? Are you really going to spend like, 15 minutes to like receive a return, open it, make sure it's all unused, somehow put it back into your own inventory, and then when you have to send it out again, you send it out again? Like, no, you should be focusing on marketing. You should be focusing on building your business, not handling these specific returns. So, that is really the reason why it can be really, really costly for anyone to process these returns for you. And please do not, I hope it's clear that it doesn't make sense to process the returns yourself, even if you have an apartment or a house in your local market.
Yeah, returns actually cost, like you said, it's $10 to $15 roughly. And if you do the math, calculating what it costs to ship a parcel from China, is most of the time even less. So it's also quite often just an economic decision. Like, why, if I would do a return, yeah, sustainability, it would make sense because it might be able to reuse, but that's also a question mark whether you can still resell it somewhere else. And then it's like, okay, cost wise, it is more expensive to actually handle the return versus shipping a new one from China. But then what is that? The alternative, right? And that's also, I think, something that it is a conversation for each of your brand. And I think it's also really about what your brand wants to stand for. And you see more and more Western countries who have a very high sustainability factor, where they want eco-friendly packaging, or they want to have contribution to a charity, or they want to have something that will make them stand out as a brand. And we definitely applaud these kind of things, but then you can also implement that for your returns. Like, what is it that you could do?
Now, sustainability, let's talk about that. And I am confident in saying this, at least for the average brand. Returns in the traditional sense are not sustainable. I'll use one extreme example. In the last maybe 5-10 years or so, there has been a boom in, they call it mattress in a box. So there's like Casper, there is Purple out there. I mean, basically, at some point they figured out this technology to like be able to literally fit an entire mattress in a box. It's pretty cool, actually. Like they come in a tube and like it kind of just like, expands. It's a cool process, right? That made it actually possible to enable D2C e-commerce for mattresses. And then what happened was that as these companies were competing with each other, they all offered 100-day free trial, or we'll take it back. And Obviously there's going to be customers who then take advantage of that, or if whatever, maybe they don't like it and then they return it, and that's kind of a complicated process, how to get it back in a box and like all of that. But the thing is, you can't resell mattresses, literally, especially something that's been used for up to 100 days. So now there are entire landfills full of mattresses rotting. Like, how is that sustainable at all? Now, obviously, that's more of a extreme example. But really, most types of products, I mean, clothing, for example, there are mountains of landfills full of return clothing that they can't resell. Even electronics, I mean, just really like all sorts of products for most categories, especially if you consider like, hey, if it's returned via shipping, what about the cost, the environmental cost of the truck, of the plane to get that parcel back in the first place? So I totally agree with the general statement that we need to be better for our environment and that sustainability should be a goal for everyone, not just in e-commerce, right? But returns in the traditional sense is not it. As a matter of fact, on average, it is actually more damaging to the environment and to trash and landfills than if you just offer some more creative solutions. So what are some creative solutions, Simon?
Well, it starts in the communication with your client and how you message them. Because and I think we saw it in a previous episode that we had with one of our clients, how they handled it is a great example. Because basically, what they offer the client is give them a 50% off, and they have the argument as well, like, us taking it back will not be good for the environment. We value sustainability. We prefer you keep the product, and we give you 50% discount on the product. And hopefully both of us are happy, because the alternative is not better for anyone. And basically, based on their data, 95% of the consumers agreed with that option, which would significantly reduce the landfill that you just described, going from 100 to 5%. And obviously, there's a few people that don't agree with it, and that's also fine because it's a consumer right. In the end, the consumer did buy your products. They felt like they have a need to buy the products. There is obviously people, consumers, customers that are misusing that, saying like, okay, I'm just going to complain and then I get the product maybe for free or I get a discount. That is in the end a very small percentage. That is not a business that you should be too worried about as a business owner, that might impact your bottom line in any way, any form. There's another one which during our briefing, one of our team members also mentioned, I think Tai also mentioned it once, is giving it to charity. Like when it is the pet product, why not give it to charity? If you are confident about the quality of your product, charity, maybe also in Europe, maybe Ukraine, or whatever there's happening where there's a need for products to be able to sustain their well-being, or you're having, or when it's clothing or something else. There are a lot of charities, food banks, that give out products to people that don't have the ability to even buy your product in the first place. That's something that definitely you can look into. There are companies that also, if these 5%, let's say 5% comes back, there are companies that just buy the stock lot. So whatever has been returned, they just buy the kilo, they just buy, and then they maybe will sell it online again. The risk as a brand owner for you is that your product might be with the photo of your brand on the marketplace, sold for a very low price, which also you don't really want. So my advice would be for that 5% that comes back, so try to avoid a return to come in the first place. It's not going to be fully 100% proof. The remaining 5%, just get it destroyed. Destroy it, get rid of it, because it's not going to help your brand in any way. It doesn't help anyone else. And that would be my point of view, but maybe you have some addition to that.
Well, so I think one very important point here is, especially if you're a newer business, not yet scaling, as an entrepreneur, and I've been there multiple times, is that sometimes we tend to focus on specific cases and therefore kind of worry about certain customer experiences or costs. So like return is one example of that, right? So maybe you say that, okay, if I don't have a return solution and then also like be able to get that money back, obviously, right? Well, obviously, I'm going to lose money on that order. But to your point, Simon, is like, as you scale, you have to think about like the business overall. Why does it matter if you lose money on one order if that's only like percentages of your overall revenue and costs anyways, and you provide actually a better customer experience? Actually, in certain industries, it's more extreme than that. I mean, we talked about the mattresses, for example, right? But in skincare or beauty, for example, it's very common to say that even at the front end messaging, this brand is going to offer 60-day, no questions asked, money back guarantee. And if any customers come and ask that, then they're immediately going to just refund them without any kind of negotiation. Say, hey, just keep the product. Right. And actually, like, well, assuming your product is good. I mean, if your product is bad, a lot of people are going to want refunds, right? But if your product is good, like that still maybe just 3-5% of your total customers, right? And the other thing that you want to consider is that now, if your product is more like, obviously the in between is, hey, offer a 50% discount, right? However, even those that offer the money back guarantee, no questions asked, right? Technically, they would lose more money on returns, right? However, some of our clients, they actually tell us that they calculate it to be actually like a net benefit because their customer service doesn't have to go back and forth. Like, I mean, if you think about it, like, I mean, like those were e-commerce, like, yes, like customer service technically is somewhat cheaper than your time or like media buyer's time. Right. But sometimes, especially for like sometimes more difficult customers, even trying to negotiate this 50% discount is going to take like maybe half an hour of your time or your customer service time over like 10 different tickets back and forth versus like, okay, money back, keep it or give it to a friend. Right. And then actually, especially if your product is good and especially if it's like those who are e-commerce know that you're going to have a lot of customers who just have really arbitrary reasons why they don't want it anymore. It's like, oh, I accidentally ordered it. I just want to return it, right? Or like, I like it, but it's not for me. I want to return it, right? This happens a lot in skincare products because it's very personal. And then there's going to be situations like, oh, like, here's your money back guarantee. Please keep the product or give it to a friend that you might think it's a better fit for. Right. And actually, like, there's enough times where they give it to a friend, the friend loves it. And then actually that actually acquires you a completely new customer, from even to be able to offer that money back guarantee. Also related is that, especially if you have a brand that has multiple products, and by the way, everyone should eventually build a brand with multiple products. The whole age of one product stores, like that's, you can't scale with that, right? You have a brand with multiple products. Your goal should be not just acquiring a sale for one product. Your goal is always, how do you acquire a customer for the long-term brand? So they don't like one of your products. You give them a great experience, even if they ask for a return. And then that doesn't, like, it's at least neutral, your relationship with them. It's not negative, right? Then there is really still a chance, like, hey, I like how this brand deals with things. I'm going to buy from them again. I'm going to like buy other things. Actually, you know what? I mean, like, you think about something like Shein, or I mean, or actually like, maybe more direct is like Amazon, right? A lot of people, including myself, actually, especially my wife, they love buying stuff from Amazon because like Amazon has very, very customer friendly return policies or refund policies. FBA sellers get annoyed by it, but still, like, to a consumer, my wife loves to buy from Amazon because she knows that just in case that something is really not to her taste, she can very easily return that. Now, that also works on every single level. If you have a brand that you're proud of that sells multiple product lines, just because a customer doesn't like or one product is not perfect for them doesn't actually mean that you have to lose them as a customer for your brand and for other categories in your brand.
Yeah, I want to, because this was actually on the news last night about a consumer being interviewed that they found out they bought a product from China, which they weren't aware of, and that they have difficulties returning it back to China. I mean, we talk about returns and we mainly talk about how to return it locally to that where you bought it. But my sister texted me after that news message saying, like, why is it so difficult to ship it even back to China? Because it came from China. Why can it not go back? I think that's what still a lot of people struggling with, getting that understanding. Why is it, if it can be shipped so cheaply from China, why can it not be returned so cheaply back to China?
So it's really related to just the evolution of China's supply chain, China being the biggest manufacturing base over the last couple of decades. And the implication of that, there is so much flow of goods from China to around the world. And therefore, so much efficiency in freight and like indirect parcels And this is why like China fulfillment works very well. It's because like there's so many courier advances so that you can ship parcels very efficiently to all these countries. The other way around just is not nearly as advanced, right? So it is actually, in terms of like just like trade numbers, is like a fraction, a tiny fraction of parcel flow comes back the other way around. So like from the United States to China, for example, right? Which means that the actual shipping lines are extremely inefficient, like extremely expensive sometimes, right? Many times way more than the cost of the product in itself. But not only that, is they have to go through usually an import process. I mean, literally, like returning a product by its mechanism means importing it back into China. And, you know, this is just the way it is. I mean, it's not that China has different rules than, let's say, the US necessarily, or at least in concept. Right? The reason why from China to the US, for example, it bypasses imports in the same way is because that's how Chinese couriers have evolved to be able to have efficient methods for doing that. That's a whole topic for another episode, so won't talk about those details, but that's how it works. Whereas there's so little demand for parcels directly into China that there's like no couriers have really like evolved to set up how do you efficiently get parcels back into China or just into China in the first place, both in terms of cost and time and also import and duty processes.
Yeah, the import process, that's the tricky part, but there's more to that as well, because technically the product has been exported basically as a small parcel, but there's not really a record of that export. So meaning that if you're returning something, if you would return it with the name of here's a return parcel, there is no proof that it has been sent in the first place. So that part is very tricky, because then you cannot connect these dots. And then bringing products, especially into China, there needs to be an owner. So you're importing it as a return, maybe potentially as a B2C as well. That owner then requires also consumer ID, a lot of information to be able to clear the goods. Or if you return in bulk, there needs to be an owner of the goods. That needs to be a company that has a license to import these products that are being returned. And if there's a wide variety of type of products, they need a wide variety of licenses. For global brands, beauty brands, it's very tough to sell into China, because before, and now I think they got rid of it, you had to do animal testing, which a lot of brands didn't want to do, or you need to get certificates to import it. If you would have a beauty brand with a returned item back to China, you would require all of that to be able to get even the return. Then it will arrive in our warehouse, potentially. We're not the owner. Technically, we're not the importer, because we don't have an import license. So there needs to be a transfer of ownership as well on paper, and it needs to be at a value. A return can never be marked as $1. It has to have a realistic value, because why are you importing something from outside of China for a very low price? It doesn't make sense. Most products importing to China are luxury products, are normally more expensive products. So that just doesn't justify to just declare a low price, to then have very low tax, and then have an ownership change as well that comes with it. The alternative is basically, if it even arrives, what are we going to do with this parcel? Probably nothing. Sustainability, again, it doesn't make sense. It's very, very complex. Secondhand stuff normally doesn't import well as well. If it's clearly a new product, you might have a chance, but it will bring a lot of complexity. If it's obviously used product, it will be a headache. We had this situation with when I was working for a postal company. There were consumer returns in a warehouse. The seller wanted these products. So what do we do with the products? Just send it back to China. Doesn't work. We had to do sea freight container loads of return parcels to Hong Kong, where they say, here's the warehouse in Hong Kong. You can pick it up if you want to, or you can just leave it there. But we do it by sea freight because it didn't make sense to do it by air. And then they had to collect it. And normally they end up selling it to someone else locally, who would then try to get rid of it on markets or just online platforms, et cetera, or give it to charity. So you end up in the same circle, almost circle of solutions that we were bringing up for the local warehouse. So returning it back to China is not solving the problem. You still have the same problem, and then probably even a bigger problem, because you have to solve the import. The thing with returns, especially if you sell different items, then which one is being returned?
Yes, I hope now it's clear why it is so complicated and costly to deal with returns, and more so if you return to China. However, it's also similarly so if you even return to a local fulfillment center as well. And one really important insight I want people to get is that, just generally speaking, if you're running a D2C e-commerce brand or D2C e-commerce channel, do not base your strategy on traditional retail. I see this quite common where, especially someone who's not experienced in traditional physical retail, that they think that, oh, physical retail must be the end game. You know, we should learn from like what Nike does. We should learn from what Uniqlo does. Don't do that. Because a big part of the efficiency and the huge opportunity of D2C e-commerce is that you're not physical retail. So, and returns is a great example of that. Why are you following traditional return policies in exactly the same way if fundamentally your entire supply chain is completely different? And this is specific returns, but this is more of a general statement as well that I want anyone who's viewing this, who's in D2C e-commerce, to really, really pay attention to.
It's probably not the answer that you were looking for when you tune into this episode. Returns are just not something that you should plan for. You can definitely reduce the returns and you can handle it smartly. But accepting a return is basically asking for trouble. And that's something that we just really want to make it clear, because it is, we have sustainability at our heart. We do feel that we have a role to play, especially because everything is going by air already. If we can reduce that footprint this is one way for sure to reduce the footprint and the impact on the globe. That's all we have for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in again. We really try to give you all the insights that we have learned firsthand with working hand on hand with our brands and our partners. Please do share a like and comment on this episode. Reach out to us. Please do let us know what you think about the episode, but also bring up your questions. We want to be engaged. We want to know what's happening in the industry, and we might be wrong. So please do educate us. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next episode.